I think people have been taught some very strange things about control. They hear the word and immediately imagine force, tightness, punishment, deprivation, some stern inner parent standing in the doorway saying no to everything warm and human. And then they wonder why they resist it. Of course they do. I would resist that too. But that is not what I mean when I talk about learning to guide yourself. I am not here to control you. I am here to help you stop being controlled by that harsh little voice in your head that keeps telling you you are not enough, not doing enough, not changing fast enough, not disciplined enough, not lovable enough. That voice is exhausting, and you cannot build a peaceful life while living in a mind that attacks you all day long. You just cannot. So before we go any further, take a breath with me, a nice, easy breath. Let the jaw soften, let the shoulders drop, and ask yourself something very gently. If the voice inside became your friend instead of your critic, where would your life get lighter? Would your mornings feel different? Would your body feel safer? Would your habits become easier? Would your healing become kinder? Because the inner voice is where you live every day, my dear. It is your atmosphere. It is your home climate. And if that climate is cold and punishing, then even success tastes a little bitter. But if that climate becomes warmer, wiser, more loving, then everything changes. Not all at once, perhaps, but deeply, steadily, in the nervous system, in the choices, in the way you rise after a hard day. You do not need to control the whole world. You need to change the voice that is leading you. I choose kind words. I am willing to learn. All is well. Let those be your beginning. You know, when people talk about self-control, they often talk as though it means denying yourself life. No sugar, no pleasure, no rest, no softness, no mistakes, no human mess. And then they call that strength. But that kind of strength usually cracks. It becomes brittle. It becomes performative. It becomes one more way to reject yourself in the name of improvement. Real self-control is something much wiser than that. It is not a prison. It is not a cage. It is not the part of you that says, no, you may not be human. Real self-control is the loving ability to guide your actions toward what truly serves your future, instead of what only relieves the moment. That is all. It is the part of you that remembers what you really want when the passing impulse gets loud. It is the part of you that says, I know this feels good for 5 minutes, but will it bless me tomorrow? That is not cruelty. That is care. That is maturity. That is love moving its legs. I think of it a little like steering a car. If you let the wheel jerk every time there is a passing distraction, you do not get freedom, you get chaos. But if you keep your hands gently on the wheel and return the car to the road, you are not trapped. You are going somewhere. That is self-control, not self-rejection, direction. Self-control is not a prison. Self-control is freedom. It means you stop being dragged around by every mood. every craving, every wounded impulse, every little voice saying, now, now, now. It means you begin belonging to your deeper intentions, and that creates a very different kind of joy. Not only the quick relief of the moment, but the quieter, steadier joy of knowing you can trust yourself. I always think people make short-term pleasure and long-term peace sound like enemies, and they are not. Not at all. The question is simply this: what kind of joy are you choosing? The joy of escape, or the joy of alignment? The joy of numbing out for an hour, or the joy of waking up proud of the way you treated yourself? The joy of saying whatever comes to mind in anger, or the joy of keeping your dignity and your truth in the same room? There are passing pleasures that cost you later, and there are loving disciplines that reward you later. Learning the difference is one of the great arts of life, and you do not learn it through shame. You learn it through honesty, through self-respect, through coming home to your own deeper values often enough that they begin to matter more than the momentary craving to flee discomfort. Discipline is self-love in motion. I do love that sentence because it makes the whole thing gentler. It stops sounding like punishment and starts sounding like care. I brush my teeth because I love myself. I rest when I need to because I love myself. I keep a promise to myself because I love myself. I walk away from something that diminishes me because I love myself. I do not rehearse the old cruel thought for the 1,000th time because I love myself. That is discipline too. Not just calendars and schedules and hard work, inner guidance, inner steadiness, the willingness to keep bringing yourself back to what is true and nourishing. But now let us talk about the part that so many people leave out when they talk about mastery, because without this part, all the rest becomes harsh and eventually collapses. I mean self-compassion, kindness toward yourself, forgiveness toward yourself, the ability to fail without turning failure into your identity, the ability to make a mistake without making yourself into a mistake. This matters enormously, because if every time you slip, your inner voice says, "See, I knew it," you ruin everything. You never change. You're hopeless. Then the whole system begins to associate growth with humiliation. And when growth feels humiliating, people stop trying, or they keep trying, but from terror. And terror is not a sustainable teacher. It may force a little performance for a while, but it does not create resilience. It creates hiding. It creates secrecy. It creates inner collapse. So when I say, I want you to master your inner voice, I do not mean I want you to become a stern little tyrant inside. I mean, I want you to become a wiser kind of companion to yourself. Someone who can say, all right, that was not the choice we wanted. Now let us learn. Someone who can say, you are not ruined. You are learning. That is very different. That keeps the door open. That keeps the nervous system from going into total shutdown. You cannot build a new life by beating yourself every day. No one blooms under constant attack, not a child, not a plant, not a heart, not a nervous system. So why would you? I remember how many people would come to me and speak to themselves with such brutality over the smallest things. I failed again. I messed it all up. I am hopeless. I always do this. And I would think, my dear, if someone spoke to you that way all day long, you would leave the room. But because it is your own voice, you have mistaken it for truth. That is one of the saddest things. People trust the cruel voice simply because it is familiar. But familiar is not the same as true. A harsh thought repeated for 20 years is still just a harsh thought. So let us change the sentence. Instead of I'm broken, try I'm learning. Instead of I failed again, try I am still practicing. Instead of I never get it right, try I am becoming more aware. This is not childish positive thinking. It is reality spoken with enough kindness that growth remains possible. Because the truth is, most of us are learning how to speak differently, learning how to respond differently, learning how to choose what nourishes us instead of what drains us, learning how to rest without guilt, learning how to stop attacking ourselves, learning how to hold boundaries, learning how to trust life a little more, learning that is the real human condition, not perfection, practice. Compassion does not make you weak. It makes you durable. It gives you somewhere to return after a hard day. It allows you to rise again without so much drama and self-punishment. It says, we are still in the game, sweetheart. We are still here. We are still learning. And I think that is why self-compassion is such an essential part of any true mastery. Because mastery is not merely doing things well when you feel strong. It is knowing how to stay with yourself when you feel disappointed. It is knowing how to recover. It is knowing how not to turn one difficult moment into a lifelong sentence against yourself. Anyone can be kind to themselves on a perfect day. The deeper practice is being kind to yourself on a messy one. On the day you spoke sharply, on the day you procrastinated, on the day you felt jealous or frightened or tired or lost or impatient. That is where a loving inner voice becomes revolutionary. It says, all right, we begin again here, not tomorrow, not after a grand self-hating speech, here, now, with one kinder sentence, one wiser breath, one gentler choice. That is mastery too, my dear, not perfect control, loving return. So if you are serious about changing your life, do not only ask, how can I be more disciplined? Ask also, how can I become kinder while I learn? Because that is how change stays. That is how trust grows. That is how the inner voice becomes something other than an old prison warden repeating the past. Put your hand on your heart now and say this with me slowly. I choose kind words. Again, I am willing to learn. And then, softly, all is well. Let those be the first new instructions. Not harsher effort, kinder leadership. And in the next part, we can go into how this inner voice actually shapes the brain, the habits, and the whole direction of your life in very practical ways. That is where it gets even more interesting. Well, my dear, one of the most important things I have ever learned is that the voice inside your own mind is not just commentary. It is not harmless background noise. It is not some little radio playing in the corner while your real life happens somewhere else. That voice is shaping the room you live in every single day. It is telling your body whether to soften or brace, whether to expect love or danger, whether to move forward or shut down, whether to try again or give up before you begin. And because it is so familiar, because you have heard it for so long, you may not even notice how powerful it is. You may think, oh, that is just how I talk to myself. But my dear, the body is listening. The nervous system is listening. The subconscious is listening. Every word you repeat becomes a kind of instruction. Every sentence becomes a direction. Every phrase becomes a little command. If the inner voice says, I can't do this, I always fail, I'm too late, I'm not enough, I never get it right, the whole system receives that as an order. It may not know how to argue with it. It simply begins organizing around it. The shoulders tighten, the breath gets smaller, the energy drops, the willingness closes. And then people say, see, I knew I couldn't. But what they are often seeing is not truth. They are seeing the result of a command repeated long enough to feel like identity. That is why this matters so much. You are not only thinking thoughts, you are training pathways. You are teaching the brain what to expect. You are telling the body what kind of world it lives in. So when I say you must become conscious of your self-talk, I am not speaking about some shallow positive thinking trick. I am speaking about the atmosphere in which your future is being shaped. Your inner words are instructions. Your self-talk is a command system. Once you understand that, you stop speaking to yourself carelessly. You stop talking to yourself as though your own nervous system were not listening. You begin choosing language that opens the door instead of language that quietly locks it. This is why the little shift from I can't to I'm willing is so healing. It looks small on the surface, but it changes the whole inner posture. I can't is a shut door. I can't is a clenched fist. I can't is a frightened child slamming the window before any light has had a chance to enter. And many people say I can't long before life has actually asked them anything. They say, I can't change, I can't heal, I can't rest, I can't trust, I can't be disciplined, I can't stop thinking like this, I can't love myself, I can't do what my heart is asking. And every time they say it, the mind hears finality. The body hears impossibility. The future hears rejection, but I'm willing is entirely different. I'm willing is a soft hand turning a key. I'm willing does not demand certainty. It does not require immediate mastery. It does not even require confidence. It only asks for openness. It says, I may not be there yet, but I am no longer completely closed. That is a miracle in itself. That is the beginning of rewiring, because the brain can work with willingness. The nervous system can stay present with willingness. A frightened part of you can often tolerate willingness long before it can tolerate a giant, impossible demand. So when the old voice says, I can't, I want you to begin answering. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see this differently. I'm willing to become kinder with myself. Do you feel how much gentler that is? And gentleness matters because the body learns better in safety than in fear. You do not need to believe it perfectly. You only need to become willing. You are rewiring the brain through the sentences you repeat. Every time you choose a softer, truer command, you are laying a different inner road. Perhaps it is a tiny road at first. Perhaps it is only a path through the grass. But walk it every day, and it becomes the way home. I remember how many people would come to me with an entire inner vocabulary of defeat. They would say, I'm so stupid. I'm so lazy. I'll never get there. I ruin everything. I always go backward. And they would say these things as though they were merely facts, as though they had found them engraved in stone somewhere. But those were not facts. They were habits of speech. They were commands that had been repeated until the body began living under them like old weather. And weather, my dear, changes. That is such a comforting thing. It changes. A stormy day does not have to become the whole climate of your soul. But if you keep announcing storms every hour, the body will stay prepared for them. That is why I want you to become very interested in the sentence level of your life. Not only the big philosophy, the little lines, the ones you say automatically, the ones that pass so quickly you think they do not matter. They matter. I never. I always. I should. I can't. Here we go again. What's wrong with me? I'm behind. I've ruined it. These are not neutral. They are like little typed instructions handed to the nervous system all day long. So, I want you to begin catching them, not hating them, not panicking about them, catching them. That is all. Catch one old command and rewrite it. That is the practice. That is how the whole thing begins. When you hear, I can't handle this, try. I'm learning how to handle this. When you hear, I'll never change, try. I'm willing to change one small thing. When you hear, I always fail, try. I am learning by practicing. When you hear, I'm a mess, try. I'm in the middle of growth. This is not pretending. It is re-educating. It is bringing the inner voice into alignment with the future you say you want. A future cannot grow in a mind that keeps cursing it. So, stop cursing your own becoming, sweetheart. Stop handing your body little orders of despair. Start choosing commands with more love in them. And I want to say something here that is very important because some people hear all this and become harsh about it too. They think, oh dear, now I have to police every thought. Now I have to be perfect in my self-talk. Now I have another way to fail. No, no, no. That is not what I want for you at all. I am not asking you to become rigid. I am asking you to become aware. There is a difference. Awareness is warm. Awareness is curious. Awareness says, ah, there is that old sentence again. Then it gently redirects. Rigidity says, bad person, you thought the wrong thought. Start over. That is just the old critic wearing a spiritual hat. We do not need that. We are not building a better prison. We are building a kinder home. So when the old harsh phrase appears, I do not want you to gasp as though you have failed. I want you to smile a little, the way you would smile at a child using an old word it has outgrown, and say, thank you for sharing. We are learning a new language now, tender, non-dramatic, firm, but kind. Because the part of you that says cruel things is often not evil. It is scared. It learned that tone somewhere. It learned that love must come through correction, shame, pressure, fear, urgency, perfectionism, or criticism. So now you are teaching it something new. You are teaching it that safety helps growth, that kindness increases willingness, that a softer voice does not make you weak, it makes you available. And that is where real change begins. Not from pressure, but from partnership. Not from inner violence, but from repeated loving correction. What you repeat becomes the pathway. The pathway can be changed. Let that reassure you. You are not stuck with the first mental roads you inherited. You can build new ones, slowly, lovingly, faithfully. So let us make it very practical now. I want you to try a little command switch, just for 1 minute, that is all. Take one sentence you have used against yourself recently. One real sentence. Not one polished, spiritual example, the real one. Perhaps it is, I'm too behind, or I can't do this, or I'll never get it right, or I'm not disciplined enough. Write it down, just as it came. Then beneath it, write 3 new versions, and I want them to begin like this. I'm willing to, I'm learning to, I choose to. So perhaps the old sentence is, I can't stay consistent. Then you might write, I'm willing to practice consistency 1 day at a time. I'm learning to keep small promises to myself. I choose one small act that supports my future. Do you see what happens? The old sentence shut the whole system down. The new sentences create movement. They create possibility. They create a next step. And the subconscious loves that. The nervous system loves that. Not because the problem disappears instantly, but because the command is no longer final and crushing. It has become directional. It has become teachable. It has become alive. This is how you begin taking mastery back, not by suppressing the old voice through force, but by giving it a wiser voice to live beside until the wiser one becomes more familiar. That is how rewiring actually feels in daily life. Not dramatic, repetitive, gentle, real. And now I want to give you the affirmations, because it is one thing to understand the principle and another thing to live with it. These 10 are not just pretty sentences. They are new instructions, new pathways, new rooms for the mind to walk into. The first 3 are your foundation, the ones that begin changing the emotional climate right away. The next 4 are for rewiring, for replacing old commands with newer, kinder ones. And the last 3 are for peace and power, for bringing you back into the deeper, steady place within yourself. Do not rush them. Let them breathe. Let them have space. Read them the way you would speak to a beloved child, learning a new language for life. First, I love and approve of myself. This is always home. This is the great healing sentence. This is the one that tells the body, you are no longer living under attack. Say it slowly. Let it settle into the chest. Let it soften the face. Let it become more than a phrase. Let it become climate. Second, I speak to myself with kindness. Oh, I do love this one, because it takes the healing out of abstraction and puts it right where it belongs in the daily tone. Not tomorrow, not when you are perfect. Now, today, in the way you narrate a mistake, in the way you begin the morning, in the way you handle a hard hour. Kindness is not decoration, it is direction. Third, my inner voice supports me. That one is so beautiful because many people have never thought to expect support from inside. They have expected criticism, urgency, pressure, comparison, disappointment, but support, that feels new, good. Let it feel new. Let the system get used to being held from within. Now the rewiring group begins. Fourth, I am willing to learn new ways. There is that word again, willing. Not forcing, not pretending, willing. This is how the door opens. This is how the old I can't begins losing its throne. Fifth, I release I can't and choose I'm learning. That one is a direct command switch. It is the moment the mind stops shutting every door before you have even knocked. Say it with strength, but not harshness. Let it feel like relief. Sixth, I forgive myself and begin again. I think people need this one almost every day, not because they are doing life wrong, but because they are learning. And learning involves wobbling. The old voice says, there you go again. The new voice says, all right, sweetheart, begin again. 7. I choose thoughts that match my future. That is a powerful sentence. It asks very simply, does this thought belong to where I am going or only to where I have been? You do not have to entertain every old thought simply because it arrives. You get to choose the ones you furnish your future with. And now, the peace and power group. Eighth, I am safe in this moment. That is medicine. Short, simple, direct. The body loves it because it is immediate, not forever. Not everything, this moment, safety now. Ninth, there is a quiet space within me. Even when thoughts are noisy, even when life is busy, even when the old patterns are still rustling around, there is a deeper room in you that is quiet. I want you to remember that you are not only the noise, you are also the space in which the noise appears. 10th, everything changes when I change the way I speak to myself. That is not an exaggeration. It is a life principle. The relationship changes, the body changes, the habits change. The courage changes, the willingness changes. The timing of your healing may even feel different because you are no longer poisoning the ground where healing is trying to grow. Now let us read them again, but not like a list, like a blessing, like a new operating system, like a softer architecture for your whole life. I love and approve of myself. I speak to myself with kindness. My inner voice supports me. I am willing to learn new ways. I release I can't and choose I'm learning. I forgive myself and begin again. I choose thoughts that match my future. I am safe in this moment. There is a quiet space within me. Everything changes when I change the way I speak to myself. Let those sit in you. Let them echo. Let them become familiar, because familiarity is powerful. The old harsh voice became strong because it was repeated. The new loving voice becomes strong the same way, through repetition, through practice, through willingness, through choosing it again on Tuesday and Friday, and the strange day in the middle when you feel old and tired and not especially inspired. That is when the new voice matters most. And I want you to remember this. Mastery of the inner voice is not about never hearing an old cruel thought again. It is about no longer mistaking that thought for the ruler of the house. It is about becoming the one who notices, chooses, redirects, blesses, and begins again. It is about changing your relationship to your own mind from fear to stewardship, from victimhood to authorship, from attack to leadership. That is a beautiful kind of power, quiet, steady, deep. Put your hand on your heart once more, my dear, and say with me very slowly, I choose kind words. I am willing to learn. All is well. And again, I choose kind words. I am willing to learn. All is well. Let that be enough for today. Let that be the new command. Let that be the first doorway, because everything really does begin changing when the voice within becomes one that knows how to love you home. This is where the healing begins, not outside, not when everybody finally understands you, not when the perfect opportunity arrives, not when the world suddenly becomes kind enough, easy enough, organized enough, loving enough to let you relax. No, my dear, it begins in a much quieter place than that. It begins in the voice that is speaking to you all day long. It begins in the tone inside your own mind, because that tone becomes attitude, and attitude becomes action, and action becomes the life you keep meeting. People are forever trying to change the visible part of their life while leaving the inner captain exactly as he was, or exactly as she was, frightened, harsh, doubtful, punishing, dramatic, suspicious, endlessly critical. And then they wonder why the outer world keeps feeling so difficult. But you cannot create a gentle life with a violent inner voice. You cannot create a trusting life with an inner voice that expects disaster every hour. You cannot create a joyful life with a mind that keeps whispering, "Don't get your hopes up. Don't believe in yourself. Don't try too much. You always mess it up." That is like asking a ship to arrive somewhere beautiful while the captain keeps steering towards storms. Your inner voice is the captain. That is not a small thing. That is the whole direction of your life. I think people sometimes underestimate how quickly the inner voice becomes external experience. They imagine it stays hidden, tucked away inside, doing little private damage that nobody can see. But of course, it does not stay hidden. If the inner voice is harsh, the posture changes, the shoulders tighten, the face hardens, the nervous system becomes defensive, the person expects trouble, so they speak from fear. They hesitate when they should move. They people please when they should set a boundary. They apologize when they should simply stand still. They over-explain when they should trust themselves. They shrink when they should be visible. They settle when they should ask for more. They react when they should pause. All of that begins in the private tone. So when I say everything changes, I do not mean some vague spiritual slogan. I mean something very practical. The inner voice changes, and then the attitude changes. The attitude changes, and then the action changes. The action changes, and then the way the world responds begins to change too. It really does happen like that. One small inner sentence becomes a different choice, and a different choice becomes a different day, and enough different days become a different life. That is why I care so much about what you say to yourself. Not because I want you to sound pretty in your own head, but because I know the consequences of living under certain language. A mind that says, "I'm learning," walks into the world differently than a mind that says, "I always fail." A heart that says, "I can handle this one step at a time," meets difficulty differently than a heart that says, "This is too much, I'll never get through it." The world may look similar on the surface, yes, but the person meeting it is different, and that changes everything. You know, there is such an interesting thing that happens when the inner voice softens. People often expect the first result to be some huge external miracle, but usually the first miracle is subtler than that. The first miracle is that you stop abandoning yourself. You stop making every hard moment harder by the way you narrate it. You stop turning every mistake into a character assassination. You stop predicting doom before breakfast. You stop rehearsing rejection before anyone has even spoken. You stop treating fear like prophecy. That is enormous. And once that begins, your attitude shifts almost without you forcing it. You become less brittle, less frantic, less ashamed, more available, more curious, more willing, more honest, more grounded. And then, because your attitude is different, you begin taking different actions. You do not reach for the same old relief every time. You do not say yes quite so quickly when your heart means no. You do not withdraw quite so quickly when life asks you to show up. You do not assume every delay means doom. You do not chase so hard. You do not explain yourself into exhaustion. And because your actions change, the outer world starts rearranging itself around the newer version of you. Not because life is some magical vending machine, but because you are now participating differently. You are now visible in a different way. You are now choosing in a different way. You are now broadcasting in a different way. The outer world is often only the visible tip. The inner world is the steering wheel. I think that is such a comforting thought, because it means your life is not as random as it sometimes feels. There is a place where change may begin, and it is closer than you thought. It is not out there. It is inside the sentence you repeat 10 times a day without noticing. I remember how many times people would say to me, "Louise, everything in my life seems to keep repeating." And of course it often was. The relationships repeated, the disappointments repeated, the exhaustion repeated, the financial patterns repeated, the self-sabotage repeated, the body symptoms repeated. But when we looked more closely, the inner voice was repeating too. No one ever really stays. I'm too much. I have to do everything myself. It's always hard for me. People don't value me. I'll probably ruin this. I'm not ready. The words were old, but they were active. They were not history. They were still issuing orders. They were still steering the ship. So the outer life obediently kept mirroring the same inner captain. This is why change must begin there. Not only there, of course, but there first. If you want a different outer life, you need a different inner authority. Not a louder critic pretending to be disciplined. Not a grand fantasy voice pretending everything is easy. A wise, loving, truthful voice. One that says, we can learn. We may begin again. We can take one step. We can choose differently. We do not need to betray ourselves here. We are safe enough to try. That kind of voice changes attitude immediately. There is dignity in it. There is steadiness in it. There is choice in it. And once choice returns, life begins opening in places where panic used to close it. When you change the inner voice, you change the decisions. When you change the decisions, life changes around them. It may not all happen in one cinematic flash, but it happens quietly, faithfully, repeatedly. That is how so much real healing works. And I think there is something else very important here, which is that the world often responds not only to what you do, but to the energy with which you do it. If your inner voice is constantly attacking you, Your actions carry strain. Even your good actions carry strain. Even your prayers carry strain. Even your goals carry strain. You may work hard, but the work comes wrapped in fear. You may love someone, but the love comes wrapped in insecurity. You may try to receive, but the receiving comes wrapped in suspicion. And the world feels that. Other people feel that. Your own body feels that. But when the inner voice becomes kinder, steadier, more aligned, then the same actions can carry a totally different energy. A boundary feels cleaner. A conversation feels calmer. A request feels less apologetic. A dream feels less frantic. A pause feels less guilty. A no feels less cruel. A yes feels less desperate. That matters. The same outer action can come from two very different inner states, and the results are often entirely different. So if you keep trying to fix the outer action without tending to the inner state, you may keep exhausting yourself. But when you begin at the source, when you begin with the captain, the whole ship starts responding. You cannot build a positive life with a negative inner guide. The guide must change. The tone must change. The internal leadership must change. That is where the healing begins. Let me say that another way, because I want it to land. The outer world is not always the cause. Very often it is the echo. Your decisions, your reactions, your standards, your resilience, your courage, your willingness to receive, your willingness to walk away, your willingness to begin again. All of these are shaped first by the voice that greets you from the inside. If that voice says, "You'll never manage," then of course you hesitate. If it says, "We can learn this," you move. If it says, "Don't ask for too much," you settle. If it says, "You are allowed to be honored," you stand a little taller. If it says, "This always happens to me," you start expecting repetition. If it says, "I choose differently now," you begin creating interruption. That is why the inner voice is not merely emotional decoration. It is governance. It is leadership. It is the invisible hand on the wheel. And once you really understand that, you stop speaking to yourself so casually. You stop calling yourself names and pretending it has no cost. You stop speaking doom and pretending it has no influence. You stop narrating your own smallness and then wondering why life keeps fitting you into cramped rooms. No, sweetheart. Speak to yourself as though your life is listening, because it is. Speak to yourself as though your body is listening, because it is. Speak to yourself as though your future is taking notes, because it is. That is the level of seriousness I mean. Not seriousness without warmth, seriousness with love. So if you want to begin changing everything, begin by listening to the captain. What does the inner voice actually say when things get hard? What does it say when you make a mistake? What does it say when you succeed? What does it say when you rest? What does it say when you receive? What does it say when you are afraid? What does it say when you want more? That is where the work is. Catch the old command. Bless it for trying to protect you. Then choose another one, not a fake one, a living one, a useful one, a forward one. Something like, I am willing to learn, or I choose kind words, or I can begin again, or all is well. You do not need 50 sentences. You need a few true ones repeated with enough kindness that the system begins trusting them. Then watch what happens. The attitude softens, the decision changes, the action changes. The world responds differently, not because you manipulated it, but because you met it differently. The captain turned the wheel, the ship followed. That is the miracle, my dear. Quiet, practical, profound. So place your hand on your heart and say this with me slowly. My inner voice is the captain. I choose kind words. I am willing to learn. All is well. What happens, my dear, when you stop arguing with every thought and simply notice that it is there? That is such an important question, because so many people think mastery of the inner voice means they must become positive every minute, spiritual every minute, calm every minute, and in control of every sentence passing through the mind. But that is not mastery. That is strain. And strain is only another form of noise. Real mastery is quieter than that. Real mastery is knowing that you do not have to follow every thought just because it arrives. You do not have to answer every knock at the door. You do not have to sit down and drink tea with every fearful little sentence the mind produces. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is not replace a thought, not analyze a thought, not fight a thought, but simply let it pass and return to the breath. That is where the gap becomes so precious. The gap is the quiet space between thoughts, the little opening where nothing is shouting for a moment, the small, clear room where you remember that you are not the noise. You are the awareness noticing the noise, and there is such freedom in that, because once you realize you are the one listening, not the thought itself, then the whole relationship changes. You stop acting as though every mental sentence is a command. You begin recognizing that some thoughts are only old weather moving through. You are not your thoughts. You are the one aware of them. The gap is where wisdom begins to speak. I think that is one of the loveliest truths in all of this work. We spend so much time trying to improve every single thought that we forget there is also a deeper intelligence that appears when thought softens and makes room. I have seen this in myself, and I have seen it in so many people. The mind starts chattering, perhaps with criticism, perhaps with fear, perhaps with planning, perhaps with some old dramatic story, and immediately the person is in it. They are riding it. They are obeying it. They are defending against it or building it into a whole emotional house. But if, just for one moment, they stop and notice, something extraordinary happens. The thought is still there, yes, but now there is also a witness. There is the beginning of space. There is the feeling of, oh, this is a thought. This is not the whole of me. And I want that for you, sweetheart. I want you to know how to create that little sacred pause. because it is so healing. You do not have to talk positively all day long in order to be free. You do not have to become some smiling machine of affirmations. You need silence too. You need the quiet that lets the nervous system stop being bossed around by every passing mental visitor. That is why I say the deepest peace is in the gap. Not because words are bad, words can heal beautifully, but because even healing words need some open sky around them. Otherwise, you are simply replacing one kind of noise with another. Mastery of the inner voice includes knowing when to stop talking altogether. You do not have to decorate every room in the mind. Sometimes you need to open a window. So let me give you two very simple ways to find that gap. The first is breath watching, and it is so wonderfully uncomplicated that people often overlook how powerful it is. For 90 seconds, just watch the breath. Do not improve it, do not dramatize it, do not turn it into a spiritual performance. Simply notice the inhale, notice the exhale. Notice the body breathing. If the mind talks, let it talk in the background like a radio in another room. Come back to the breath. In, out, in, out. That is enough. 90 seconds can do so much because it interrupts the old habit of chasing every thought into a whole emotional movie. It tells the body, we are here now. It tells the nervous system, you do not have to keep running. It tells the mind, there is something other than you, sweetheart, and we are returning to it. The second practice is labeling, and I love this one because it is so kind and so non-dramatic. When a thought arises, instead of climbing into it, simply say to yourself, thinking, that is all. Not terrible thought, not I'm failing, not here I go again, just thinking. Then return to the breath. Do you feel what that does? It does not attack the thought. It does not turn it into a spiritual emergency. It simply names the activity and comes back to what is real. It says, ah, yes, the mind is producing thought. That is what minds do. And now we return. That little phrase can save so much energy. You do not need to wrestle with every thought. You may notice it and return. That is the gap. That is the opening. That is how the mind begins learning it is not the only voice in the room. And after a while, if you practice this, you begin sensing the still place more easily. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is only a second or two of true quiet, but that second or two is full of life, full of presence, full of wisdom, much fuller than an hour of noisy worry. And once you begin finding that gap, then something else becomes much easier. And that is recognizing the different inner voices without becoming hypnotized by them. I think this helps people so much because often they say, my mind is awful, as though it were one giant undifferentiated monster. But it is not. There are different little characters in there, different habits, different old voices. And when you can name them, you can stop taking them so seriously. One of them is the critic. Oh yes, we know that one. The critic says, "You're not enough. You should be further along. You always ruin it. Look at you, very sharp, very familiar, very tired, really." And what I want you to do with the critic is not fight with it as though it were truth, but answer it the way a calm, loving adult would answer a fretful old voice that has outlived its usefulness. "Thank you. I'm learning." That is enough. You do not have to build a whole case. You do not have to prove your value to the critic. You simply stop letting it run the house. "Thank you. I'm learning." There is softness in that. There is dignity in that. There is movement in it too. The critic wants finality. "You are hopeless." But "I'm learning" keeps the future open. "I'm learning" keeps the door open. "I'm learning" is self-respect with compassion in it. You do not defeat the critic by hating it louder. You outgrow it by choosing a wiser tone. Then there is the panicker. This one is often very dramatic. It says, "What if everything goes wrong? What if this means disaster? What if this is the beginning of the end?" The panicker loves catastrophe. It loves imagination without grounding. It loves urgency. It wants your whole body now. And you do not have to argue with the panicker either. In fact, argument often feeds it. The best response is something much calmer, much more grounded, much more body-oriented. All is well in this moment. Not forever, not every detail, not every future possibility. In this moment. I love that because it brings the mind back to what is actually happening now. The panicker is usually living 10 minutes, 10 days, or 10 years ahead. But the body is here. The breath is here. The chair is here. The floor is here. The heart is here. So when the panicker rises, answer it with present time reassurance. All is well in this moment. Then breathe. Let the exhale be longer. Soften the jaw. Let the phrase and the body work together, because a panicked thought does not always need more information. Often it needs containment. It needs a softer nervous system. It needs a wiser room to be held in. You do not calm the panicker by joining its speed. You calm it by returning to the moment. And then, of course, there is the controller. This one sounds very responsible, doesn't it? It often dresses itself up as competence. It says, "You must fix this now. You must solve this now. You must manage all of this immediately." It can sound almost noble at first because it appears to care so much. But really it is often fear trying to become management. The controller believes that if it can just tighten enough, think enough, plan enough, rehearse enough, then life will stop being uncertain. But life does not work that way. So when the controller starts speaking, I want you to answer it with something simple and true. I do my part. I release the rest. That is such a beautiful sentence. It gives you responsibility without burdening you with godhood. It says, yes, I have a role. No, I am not the whole universe. The controller needs that reminder. It needs to know that not everything is yours to solve before bedtime. Not every outcome belongs in your hands. Not every mystery requires your immediate interference. You do not need to argue with the controller. You need to give it a smaller, truer job. I do my part. I release the rest. That is real sanity. That is peace with a backbone. And what I love about all of this is that you do not actually have to fight any of these voices. That is where people waste so much energy. They think, now I must defeat the critic, silence the panicker, destroy the controller. But no, sweetheart, you do not need one more inner war. You only need to stop handing the microphone to the wrong speaker. You change the channel. That is all. You say, ah, critic, thank you. I'm learning. Ah, panicker, all is well in this moment. Ah, controller, I do my part. I release the rest. Do you see? Not a courtroom, not a battle, not a dramatic purge, a channel change, a wiser response, a calmer room. You do not have to fight the voice. You have to stop obeying it. That is much gentler, much cleaner, much more effective. And when you combine that with the gap, with the breath, with the little noticing, thinking, then the whole mind begins changing its tone. Not because you forced it into silence forever, but because you stopped feeding its old theater every single time the curtain rose. So let us gather this together now in one soft, strong practice. Close your eyes if you like, or simply lower the gaze. Notice the breath for a moment. In, out. If a thought comes, say quietly, thinking, and return. Then ask yourself, which voice is here right now? Is it the critic? Then answer, thank you, I'm learning. Is it the panicker? Then answer, all is well in this moment. Is it the controller? Then answer, I do my part. I release the rest. Then come back to the breath. Come back to the gap. Come back to the place in you that is wider than all the voices. There is such power in that, such sanity, such healing, because the deepest part of you is not frantic, not cruel, not controlling. The deepest part of you is present, quiet, loving, spacious. That is the place I want you to keep returning to again and again until it becomes more familiar than the noise. And it will, my dear. It truly will. And so it is.